let's talk about boots. Greetings, adventurers. My name is Kramer, and we are back in a more historically accurate garb, but mostly because I am once again influenced by Kingdom Come Deliverance. And if you've ever had this sort of back and forth with, oh, I really like the fantasy stuff, or oh, I really want to be as historically accurate as possible, I think that's fine. I think that's normal, because as we keep ping-ponging back and forth between the two sort of sides, we will eventually end up in the middle with a historically accurate style of fantasy. So that's where I'm sort of at right now. I'm on the historically accurate side, which is why we're going to talk about shoes. Now, some of you will probably recognize these. I made these probably 2 years ago. They've held up very well for how long I've had them. I've taken them out for filming videos, obviously, and then going on a couple hikes here or there, and they've held up well. But there are some problems with them when compared to a more historically accurate medieval shoe. Something like this, a medieval Osberg pattern turn shoe. This is from Foxes and Ravens, the pattern that I used. It's only like 12 bucks. I don't get anything from this, but the link is down in the description if you want to make your own pair of these. They're actually very easy, and there will be some tips later in the video on how I made these, things that'll just like clarify the process a little bit more. So the difference between these is that this is based off of a historically accurate pattern to the medieval period, and these are moccasins. And while they do work reasonably well, I was going for that sort of Aragorn look, and I do think it really fits. It's not a historically accurate shoe for a couple reasons, and I do have a full video going over this boot here. The first one being, of course, that the way that a moccasin is stitched together, the way that the sole attaches to the upper, it's just simply not accurate to an actual medieval shoe from Europe. And the other thing is that a boot that is this tall is not generally historically accurate either, perhaps for certain styles of riding boots, but again, it's kind of in the name. A riding boot is meant for if you are riding. I'm also now going to critique the way that I personally put together this shoe in the hopes that my mistakes will be helpful to you as you are creating your own shoes, potentially. So the first one is that I messed up the sole, and I don't exactly remember what my thought process was for this at the time. I'm sure I had one, but it was stupid and it doesn't make any sense. So it'll be hard to show here, but the interior of the shoe, like the inside that your foot goes on, for some reason I decided that having the skin side of the leather, that's the smooth side, be what's in contact with my foot, and then I glued the suede side to the bottom. So that has resulted in the inside of the shoe itself being very slippery. And that means that there's no traction, because traction can be here, but traction is also between your foot and the bottom of the shoe itself. So because the inside is slippery, I can't grip anything while I'm wearing these shoes, and it just makes it far more difficult to wear. Another thing is I actually beefed up the soles probably too much. I like a barefoot shoe. Those of you who have been following me for a while know that I have really fallen in love with barefoot shoes, mostly because I liked these originally. Then I tried a real like modern barefoot shoe, and then I experienced that and I was like, wow, that's even better. And now I've made my own Osberg medieval shoes, and those are even better. But these are too thick. They don't bend as much as they're supposed to for barefoot shoes, so I don't get the contact that I need, and I also don't get the traction that I need. So I would reconstruct the sole differently. I mean, I'm probably gonna wait until these like truly wear out before I redo them, but these do need to be redone at a certain point. That's part of the fun thing about making your own shoes, is that a lot of this, even if I decide that I don't like the way I made it, it's reusable. I don't just have to throw away the whole shoe and then start from scratch. A lot of the pieces are gonna be reusable. I can just redo the sole and then restitch it to the upper. Another thing that I'm not a fan of, as I've used these shoes for the last 2 years, is the way that I decided to do this lacing method, where it sort of just ties up tight up here, and then I've been lacing it around the bottom towards my ankle. It's really not comfortable. And that's simply because the boot is actually not tall enough. Where it sits, it's sort of in the widest part of my calf, so the boots do want to fall. Ideally, you would want to actually have the boot tall enough that it's just below your knee. That's where your calf starts, and then it gets wider, and then that's going to help it from slipping down your leg. These are right at the widest part of my calf, so I have to tie them really tight in order to keep the boots from just like doing this on my leg. And what that means is, because the calf is a muscle that gets stretched and then contracts when you're walking or climbing or running or whatever, it means that it's very uncomfortable when these ties are digging into my leg while I'm doing that. So if I'm gonna redo these, it's kind of too late to make them taller. So probably what I'll do is actually I'll come up with a side lace system very similar to the boot that I'm posting right here instead. And it won't be quite as Aragorn, but it will be more comfortable because I actually, as the years have gone on, I don't really like wearing these, unfortunately. They're well made, they've held up really well, but they're just not comfortable. And being comfortable while you're on an adventure is very important because why would you want to be uncomfortable if you could help it? This sounds like it's leading into an ad, but it's not. But that does bring us to this shoe. These are from Zero Shoes. I will again post a link to this in the description. It is not affiliate. I just really, really like these shoes because you will notice how similar they are to the Osberg barefoot shoes. You know, there are some modernisms on this. There's more pieces to the upper. It's stitched sort of in that modern combat boot style, and it's got regular laces and then the little tab back here. And it's got a leather tongue. The Osberg boot does not have that, but in terms of like the overall form, if you replace the laces with something that were leather, these would pass, I think, very reasonably as a medieval shoe. And the traction on these is just amazing. I have gone canyoneering in these, I've gone rock climbing in these, and they've held up perfectly fine. I really, really like these shoes, and these are what I now wear all of the time. And personally, I just viewed it as a very good investment to grab a pair of these because I don't always want to be wearing my medieval shoes, especially if I'm just walking around town in jeans. These are maybe gonna look a little weird, potentially conversation starter, but I can just wear these. They look more modern when dressed with modern clothing, but they're also versatile enough to then wear with costume as well. These are a much heavier duty shoe in addition to just being a barefoot shoe, so I really, really do like these. So now on to the more historically accurate, the Osberg boot. How is this different from the Moccasin? Well, at first, I was thinking that a shoe like this would actually be less waterproof than the Moccasin, and that is because on the Moccasin, the sole rises up to meet the upper, so the seam is on the top of the shoe rather than on the bottom, whereas on these, the seam is actually right here along the edge, which means the seam is going to be in contact with water more quickly in shallower puddles, and I thought that would result in these being less waterproof. But now having made them, and now that I understand the stitching pattern for these, I actually think these are going to be more waterproof, and I will test this later on. I'm actually currently contractually obligated not to destroy these shoes yet, so that video is forthcoming. It won't be for a little while, though. I'm in a show. I made these shoes for a show, and I can't ruin them because they're part of my costume. But because these, they're sewn inside out, that means the seam is actually very much on the inside of the shoe, and it goes sideways through the sole rather than just up and down. So the seam is actually very well hidden on the inside of this shoe, which makes me think that it's going to be more waterproof than the Moccasins were. In comparison to the taller boot, it doesn't protect your shins as well if you were walking through brush or something like that, but you can wear leg wraps. But these shoes, as I've made them, do actually have the suede side of the leather on the interior, not the smooth side, and this is just one singular sole. It's not multiple layers like my Moccasins are, and that means that these are far more comfortable. They have that wider toe box that regular barefoot, modern barefoot shoes have that I really like, and the traction on the inside is much better. I also got the sizing more correct with these. Now, very, very briefly, some things that I would change about these. I have not been wearing these quite as long. I'm not really a fan of this lace system either. Just because the laces don't stay knotted super, super well. So probably what I'll do is I'll end up punching holes on one lace and having a buckle on the other one. That way I can have it as tight as I want it without having to worry about it coming undone. But that's kind of the only thing I would change so far. That and the upper material that I used isn't the greatest. But in terms of just how comfortable they are, I would wear these over the moccasin style boots simply because they don't hurt my calves when I'm wearing them. And because of the thinner soles, these are just an all-around more comfortable shoe. Also, due to the way that these are stitched together, again, these are stitched inside out and then turned right side in. That's why they're called turn shoes. When they're brand new, they sort of curl up like this when you first finish them, and then that curl sort of relaxes a bit as the leather stretches and as the stitches relax. But that innate sort of curl, due to the way that it's made, feels very ergonomic to me in that it wants your foot to like roll forward naturally, whereas the moccasins, because they're just sort of stitched together right side in already, they just lay very, very flat, and if you're already flat-footed, it doesn't help as much as a innate curve like this one does. And because I've had these ones for so long, I sort of didn't realize how much the shoes themselves had actually stretched out until I made this brand new pair and then put them on and went, oh, right, that's how these shoes are supposed to feel. They're supposed to feel kind of kind of snug, very form-fitting, and these ones are just much looser because they're much older, which made me realize when you think about replacing leather shoes, like going to a cobbler and getting repairs done, it's not necessarily that you would wear these probably like until there's a hole through the sole or the stitching is coming undone. It's that a pair of shoes is supposed to fit a certain way when they're made like this, and you may need them repaired or replaced far before they're like actually trashed, just simply because they don't fit right anymore and therefore can no longer serve their purpose. So a pair of shoes that is stretched may be just as useless to you as a pair of shoes that has a hole in it. Now, briefly, I just wanted to mention, and I have said this before, that while shoes like this, I think I got these from like TJ Maxx or something for like 20 bucks, while shoes like this look great for a costume, and look fine for a costume, like I wore it as part of my Witcher costume, these are just not good adventuring shoes at all. The sole is far too thick, it's got a heel, which is not very useful, no matter what you're doing, unless it's horseback riding. These are just not a good practical adventuring shoe, even though they are a great costume shoe, and I would pick these over these any day as well. So now I'm just going to briefly give you some tips on how I made these, because Foxes and Ravens, the pattern is below. It does not come with instructions, though they do have some videos on their YouTube channel, which I'm linking. There were still some questions that I had, and the biggest sort of confusion point here for me was figuring out how to orient everything so that I could actually sew it inside out. My brain just does not do well with like three-dimensional objects being manipulated in space. I don't know what it is, I just couldn't visualize it. So I just laid down the sole backwards. So the skin side was already facing me, and then I laid the upper on top of it with the wider piece facing that contour, and that meant that the upper also had to be inside out. So the skin sides are touching, and then you line up the back holes, and it was just much easier to do it that way. You take the sole, you place it on the table, skin side facing up, and then you take the upper and you place it skin side facing down on the upper, and then you start stitching along the outside. It was just much easier. And that was pretty much the only point that I had where I was like genuinely confused about it. The other thing I will say is whether you're using the pattern that's linked below or you're using a different pattern or you're making your own, make the shoes slightly smaller than you think you're going to need them, because they will stretch. When I first tried these on, like they were brand new, I had just finished them and I tried them on, I thought, these are just slightly too small and I should have gone a size up. And then I walked around in them for a day and now they are the correct size. So if you size the shoes the way that you think they're supposed to be sized, they will end up eventually being too big, very similar to my moccasins are, whereas these ones I put them on, they were on the verge of being too small, and now they're perfect. So size down just a little bit when you're making shoes like this. Also make sure while you're sewing the upper to the sole that no leather is actually folding in order for you to get those stitches in. It should all be very flat, with the two pieces just riding next to each other. That way when you flip it right side in, when you're done with it, the seam will be folded on the inside of the shoe. Another piece of advice I have for you is when you are stitching the sole to the upper, don't try to do the whole thing in like one set of thread for a couple reasons. The first one is the longer the thread is, the more difficult it is to work with and the more likely it is to get knotted up, and it's just a very frustrating experience. I know the thought process. I tried to do it with these. I was like, oh, if I could just get it all done in one thing, then I don't have to like rethread the needles and just do multiple threads. That will also make it easier to repair if a stitch comes done. You don't have to redo the entire shoe. You just take that one section and redo it and the rest of it is fine. It's just much easier to do it with shorter threads. That will definitely make it easier to repair these if you're out on an adventure on the road. And lastly, the sort of recommended necessary tools for this pattern does say that you should use a French beveler. I don't own a French beveler. I did not use a French beveler, and that has resulted in the sole actually having this big fat lip up here towards the toe. And it's not the end of the world, it's just not very aesthetically pleasing. So if I had used a French beveler, I could have gotten that seam to be much closer together and those stitches a lot tighter where the upper meets the lower right there, so you wouldn't have that lip. So just grab a French beveler. Some cheaper ones exist for like $12. I should have done that to begin with. For my next pair that I make, I will do that. Use a French beveler and you will avoid that ugly lip. So before I take steps out the door to actually go on an adventure to share with you, I do have to know what I am putting on my feet, which is why I made this video, which is why I made the new shoes. So I will see you very soon. And in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures. If you made it all the way to the end of the video, thank you so much. And a special thank you to all of my patrons whose names are appearing on the screen. If this video spoke to you, please consider becoming a member on Patreon with the link in the description.